It's interesting, in the reading we just heard, it says, they gave the sense so that the people understood the reading. That is not at all what I am about to do. I was like, oh man, I probably should have tried to put this together. No, I'm actually here to talk to you today about experimentation. And there is a handout in your folder, which I will ask you to bring up, but not just yet. In a few moments, we'll do that. Because whenever anybody talks about experimentation, I've been in this church long enough to know that when you go and talk to people about experimentation, a couple of things happen. You see, I run a laboratory called TriTech, which is an experimental laboratory for church innovation. And usually when I tell people that, they look at me and they say, I understand all the words you just said are in English, but I do not understand them in the way you just said them. Church, innovation, experimentation, what are you talking about? We are the church, right? We carry a tradition with us. I once was giving this chat in San Francisco, the Bay Area. I said, oh, you're like Silicon Valley, right? You break things and you make them new. And I'm like, well, sort of, kind of, except we have this tradition that is with us. It's a beautiful tradition that we don't want to let go of. It's a tradition that has held us together, right? This belief in Jesus Christ. All of these things are beautiful. We don't just do away with them and start again a new religion. That's not what we're called to do. However, I do believe that God continuously calls us to new things. God is always opening up God's heart to say there are new things that you can try. There are new ways of being the church in the world. So in the presence of the bishop, I would not dare ask you how many of you might be anxious about the changes going on in your diocese. Do not worry, I am not asking you that, but I will name it, right? That anxiety happens. When we talk about changing things, anxiety happens. When you talk about moving a candle on the altar, anxiety happens, right? I get that. I understand this. But this doesn't mean that we shy away from it or that we walk away from what God is calling us to do. Rather, we remember the Psalm, Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. I've always loved the book of Job because the whole part of it is basically at the end God saying, I'm sorry, were you there when I was making it all? No, right? So you be you, I'll be God, and we're going to get along just fine. And in some ways, God needs to remind us of that this anxiety we have, oh my God, the church's going to end. No, it's not. I guarantee you right now, the church of Jesus Christ will not die. All right? So just let's let go of that. And all the things we may try, all the experiments we may try, there have been smarter people who have literally tried to kill the church and have been unable to do so. How will we, in our best efforts to actually try to help it, kill it? It won't happen. So let us just let go of that anxiety for a moment, knowing that God is with us, God is calling us to this, and that we serve a purpose here today. So, you're all like, who is this crazy guy? My name is Lorenzo Lebrija. I am a priest in the Diocese of San Diego. I live in Palm Springs, California, where yesterday was 102 degrees. So I am glad to be with you all here where leaves change, where water falls from the sky. What is it? What is all this wonderfulness? It's wonderful. I have not seen one palm tree. Maybe you have them, but I have not seen one, so good for you all on that. And I like I mentioned before, my job is, I probably have the best job in the church, I really do. I run the experimental laboratory, I'm the executive director, and I'm also the chief innovation officer for Virginia Theological Seminary, and now General Theological Seminary, since they're affiliating together. So what that means is that I get to go around and play. I get to go out and try different things all over the place, because all of us here at some point or another have said, hey, I wonder what would happen if we did blah, blah, blah. Fill in the blank. You all who are in ministry or have ever been in a church have wondered that question. What would happen if we did this? But life happens. And you're generally one clergy person to a church, and then the toilet breaks, and you've got to fix that, and then someone died because, God forbid, they died Monday to Friday from 9 to 5. No, they died like when you're trying to be creative, and you've got to handle that pastoral care, and life happens, and that question that you had, that what-if question, you no longer have the opportunity to go and figure out, oh, I wonder if there was a there for that. So when we talk about innovation in the church, this is what's kind of interesting. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands if this has been your experience, but when we try something new, generally, these or a variation of these might be the steps you take. You think about the idea, you pray about the idea, you write a paper about the idea, then you go back to thinking about the idea a little bit more. Then you take it to like a council within the church. They're like, ooh, that's a crazy idea. Then you think about more about the idea. It's like, is it really crazy? Then you go back and you're like, okay, I think the idea is actually a good idea. I'm going to actually take it to a conference. And maybe you take it to a conference where people boo your idea. You're like, oh, maybe it wasn't the best idea. But I still think it's a good idea. The Holy Spirit is calling me towards this idea. I need to do something with this idea. So you finally bring it to your vestry. The vestry will say no the first time. Then you bring it back to your vestry, and eventually the vestry says yes, and then you get to try your idea. And this is how you end up with a MySpace page in 2022. Right? Because it took us a little time to get from that moment when you had an idea to when the idea actually becomes something that you can do. So what we were trying to do is we're like, what if there was a better way? What if there was a little laboratory, kind of like a think tank, but that just didn't think about ideas, but actually went out and tried them? And not just like Lorenzo going out and try them, but if we actually went out and found partners, and we said, hey, what if in your congregation we try this idea? I think it's a wonderful idea, let's go ahead and try it. And so we try it. And the steps would be, idea, let's try it. Nothing in between. Just let's go out and try it. Then, if we find that it works, we can look for where is the theology in this idea, right? I remember we were coming up with this idea called a digital collection plate, which was a little tap machine that you could put in your collection plate that when it went by, it would tap, and every time you tapped it, it was $5. Boop, boop, boop. There's $15, right? And each time it took 3 seconds. It was brilliant, I thought. So I was presenting this idea to some people, and they're like, where's the theology of that? And I was like, that God wants us to be generous and that we need to make it easier for people to be generous? I'm not sure, but we'll figure that out if it works, right? We don't need to figure it out on the front end, where exactly is God in all of this, but rather, let's go out and try it. So that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to create this place where we could just go out and try things. And here are some of the things we have tried. If you have an Alexa speaker, are you all familiar with the smart speakers, right? That can play music. They can say, good morning, Alexa. Mine says, good morning, you handsome man. I'm like, well done, Alexa, thank you. And then she plays music for me. You can actually go up to your Alexa and say, Alexa, open Episcopal prayer, and she will lead you through the morning office or the evening office based on the time of day, wherever you might be. And you're like, well, that's interesting. About 500 people right now are praying the daily office with Alexa on a regular basis. And you might be like, well, that's cute, but what's the point of that? How's that going to get people? Well, we know from research that people who engage with Scripture at least 4 times a week are more likely to be happier people. They're more generous people. They tend to be more philanthropic. They tend to also go to church more regularly. Amazing how that works, right? So that's what we were doing with Alexa. Some of the other ideas that we've tried. How many of you here have ever thought, oh, we should do Spanish language, we should do some sort of Latino ministry? Anybody ever thought about Latino ministry, right? Because the neighborhoods keep changing. And what is the number one barrier to Latino ministry in the Episcopal Church, which is 98% not Latino? We don't speak the language, right? Well, turns out that 72% of Latinos in this country are later generation Latinos, and they prefer their information in English. Not only are they bilingual, they prefer their information in English. So we're having an experiment called La Misa in English, where what we're trying to do is figure out, can we create a culturally legitimate service for English-speaking Latinos? First thing we did, I'm sorry to the organist, was get rid of the organ, right? They're not organists. It calls on us to be ecclesiastically flexible. Like, we are not used to celebrating, for example, First Communion in the Episcopal Church, but we don't have anything that says we can't. right? So what if we mark that day as a special day when someone is entering into communion? So we figured out, is there a way of doing that? That's what we're experimenting right now with 4 different congregations. For some of you may know this because you probably serve in smaller congregations. Within our church, we have about 6,000 congregations in the Episcopal Church. 1,730 of them have 29 or fewer people on a Sunday. Many of them do not have a full-time priest. Most of them do not have a full-time priest. Many of them don't even have a clergy person that comes on a regular basis. This might sound familiar to you. And what we discovered as we were looking at these smaller congregations is that they're really beautiful places that have a lot of the Holy Spirit in them. But sometimes on Sunday, the worship is a little bit less than best. You know, what happens is they get together, there might be, 15 of them, and they do morning prayer. And then I actually heard this story that one time a woman got up and read an article from Reader's Digest as a sermon. Nothing against Reader's Digest. I have seen some amazing diets in there. That said, I'm going to guess that the Jesus count was pretty low on that Sunday at that sermon. So we said, is there a way that we could provide them with good, deep sermons, at least, if anything else, during the special seasons of the year? So we created the virtual preaching monks. Our monks from Cambridge, Massachusetts, got together, they recorded some sermons, and we now know, because, we're all digital churches now somehow, we now know that people can receive the message through the screen. So if you roll up a TV, you can hear the monks giving you a 15-minute, deep, well-thought-through sermon. And I remember asking Brother James from the SSJ, the Society of St. John the Evangelist, I said, Brother James, how many congregations do you think we'll get? He's like, well, I think we're going to get about 20 to sign up for this. I'm like, Brother James, I'm more optimistic than you on this, apparently. I think we'll get about 40. We ended up with 730 congregations signing up to use the virtual preaching monks. Now, what that means is that not everybody used it as a Sunday sermon. Some of them used it as a Sunday, an opportunity after church to get together and listen to something and talk about it. Others used it as a Bible study. There were other ways of using it, right? But this was something we created. Right before the pandemic, we thought, it's interesting to me. I was reading something, and I read that 98% of text messages are read. 98%, which begs the question, who are those two out of 100 who don't read text messages, right? What is going on? How do you not read your text? Oh, there we go. The guilty ones. 2 just raise their hands. Yep, that's faint. So there we are. The guilty have been found. But we're like, what if we actually use texting to connect a congregation to the members of the congregation? Let's try it, right? That's our motto. Let's try it. And we did. And as it turns out, 25% more attendants showed up to special events when we texted to remind them over just emailing them. So you might send out something like, hey, we're having a special service tonight on Wednesday for fill in the blank. And you email it, X number of people will come. But if you text them, 25% more people come because they're reminded of it right on their screen right there. And then COVID happened. It was actually a beautiful way of gathering people and getting information like, how are you doing, what's happening, what's going on in your life, tell me more. All these things, we were able to stay connected even though we had distance between us. And it's not hard to do. The technology to do the texting costs about $200 a year. And you're actually able to do it on your computer. It's not like you have to sit there on your phone and text 300 people at the same time. But you know what's interesting is when on a Thursday morning, you get a random text that says, hey, Walter, it's Father Lorenzo. Just want to let you know I'm praying for you. Is there anything special you want me to pray for? And I can individualize it for each and every one of you here. And when you respond, only I get it, unlike a reply all on an email. And I can find out whether or not Walter has any special prayer concerns. But here's what else happens, is that those people are then reminded that their church, that they matter to their church. And when Sunday morning comes and they need to make a choice as to whether or not to go to church, more often than not, they do. Because we know the new average is that 4 out of 6 people will go on average now every 4 or 6 weeks now to church. So if you get new people to join you, that's the new average for them to come and join you. But before you think that, oh my God, that Lorenzo's so smart, please, 2 out of 3 of our experiments do not work. And I want to tell you about an experiment that I thought was the best idea ever. Anyone here ever heard of a thing called Soul Cycle? Right, there are these spinning gyms, spinning studio is basically a place with like 13, 20 bicycles that go nowhere. You just sit there and you stare at someone yelling at you. It's really amazing how we pay for that. But that's what people do. And I saw this thing called Soul Cycle. And you walk in there and the lights are dim. They have candles on the wall. And it says, find your soul on the wall. And when the class starts, the things they say are like, there's no day but today, and it was created just for you. I'm like, probably has more Jesuses than the Reader's Digest. This is actually a sermon right here. And I said, what if people who are not going to church are finding their spirituality in group fitness classes? And what would happen if we were to merge a Eucharist and a spinning class? And thus was created Spin Church. Now, I want you to know that we found this place and we rented out the little hall and we ran ads on Facebook. 27,000 people saw the ads. 86% of them were women, which is what we wanted. They saw the ads about a total of 160,000 times. And 1.2% of them engaged with those ads. Right? That means they liked them, shared them, forwarded them to their friends. That's a 1.4 click-through rate on Facebook, which is 3 times the average, 3 times what they consider a well-performing campaign on Facebook. 9 people, we only had 10 little bicycles, so 9 people signed up to be at the first Spin Church. And none of them came. Womp womp, right? But the good news is that I had all their information and I was able to reach out to them and say like, hey, ¿qué pasa? Why weren't you there? You signed up and all that. Well, as it turns out, people who already find their spirituality in group fitness classes already find their spirituality in group fitness classes, right? It's like, oh yeah. It's no different than people who are already going to church are already going to church. So it's like opening up a church right next to a church. So, but going through that was still a worthy exercise. It was still answering a question, what if, right? And that's what's important here. Being able to answer the question, what if? I began by telling you that the church is not going to die. Yay, good news. I have more good news for you. Our church, how many of you have seen, there was actually a headline in the Washington Post in 2017 that said mainline Christianity has 24 Easters left. That was in 2017, so we have 5 less than that now, right? We have 19 Easters left, if you believe that. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. What I do believe is that we have to do it a little bit different. Because for all the things we hear about our church just losing members left and right, let me share something with you. If each one of the 6,000 congregations in the United States added 1 new member per month, we would have a net gain for the year as the church. 1 new member per month. Get a family and there's half your year, right? And yet, why is that scary to us? Why do we think that we can't attract 1 new member per month? That shouldn't be that difficult if our job is to go out and make disciples of Jesus Christ. If what we believe is true, which is that the good news is the good news, then there's our invitation. Go out and find 1 new member. So, to help you do that, I created a framework. So I published this little book. It's a bestseller on Amazon because my mom bought a whole bunch of copies. It's called How to Try. And it's also available as an audiobook, by the way. If you're not yet done hearing me talk to you today, you can listen to me for 4 hours on your drive home as I read the book to you. But this book is really a simple framework that we're going to go through right now. So don't tell my publisher. You don't even have to buy the book. If you want to buy, there's a discount code there. You can buy it for 20% off from Church Publishing. But you don't even have to buy the book because we're about to go through it in some detail now. Because it's really as simple as 1, 2, 3. There are 3 steps to this framework, and I want to share that with you today. Because all of you today have somewhere within you an idea that you want to try. You may not even be aware that you have an idea you want to try, but you do. It's somewhere in there. Even if the only question you've ever asked is, how do we attract more young people to the church? Anybody here ever asked that question? Right? No one, of course. Nobody ever asked that question. So, the 3 steps are generating insights, and they're all in the handout that you have there. So, they're generating insights, coming up with those beautiful ideas, and then how to try the ideas. And I'm going to go through them right now to explain them to you so you can walk out of here knowing that you can do this, that you are able to do this, to try things without sinking the church. Remember, I've already given you permission to go and try. You're not going to kill the church, so just go out with abandon and try it. One last thing before we go into them. Most of us, being well-meaning people with white hair, will come up with these things, and we'll begin usually at step number 2, which is come up with ideas, right? How do we attract young people? And we sit around the table, and we're like, okay, let's come up with ideas. I know, let's do a skate park. All right, we'll do a skate park. All right, let's go ahead. Let's build a skate park. How much is it going to cost us? $10,000. All right, we'll put it all in. All chips are in on the skate park. But young people are going to be with us. Oh, these young people, they're going to come to church now. And we go out and we build a skate park, and nobody shows. We're like, but what happened? So, well, did we look at any of the insights? Are there young people around us? Do young people still like skate parks? Or are they done with skate parks, that's why the first step, the discovering insight step, generating these insights is so important. So, with each one of these 3 steps, there's some mindset that I encourage you to have. Because when you walk in here, you want to have different mindsets for each one of them. So for this first step, which is discovering the insights, your mindset is be curious. Imagine that you're before the 6th grade, when everything was still possible. Something happens when we get to the 6th grade. We become like little adults, and we lose all we're no longer fanciful. We're like little adults more than that. So go back to when you were in 5th grade, when you ask questions about everything. Like, why don't those 2% of people respond to text? I need to talk to you about that later. Because I am curious. No.
There's no cell service.
Oh, there you go. You just didn't get the text. Oh my God, I tried to get a Lyft last night, like an actual Uber Lyft from the airport. And it said it's like 60 minutes and it'll be there. I'm like, what? So, yeah. So, anyways.
There's only one driver.
Yeah. Apparently, you guys only have one driver. That could be a ministry. Go into your Lyft, drive a Lyft around, and wear your collar, put a little sign that says, I'm a priest, do you want to talk? So be curious. You want to be curious. And it all begins with what we call the design question. The design question is what we begin all of this, because otherwise you can just be going all over the place with your research as you're doing this. So as you're looking at this, and I actually have a design question that we're going to be able to use here, so let me get to it here real quick so that I can have my design question handy. All right. So you might be asking, for example, should we add a contemporary service? How can we better serve the neighborhood as it changes? Should we open a preschool? How can we bring in more revenue? Those are probably questions that some of you are currently asking, right? And that's our design question. It's something that lays out a question that we're hoping to answer with our research. Let's stick with do we want to attract more young people? Should we attract more young people? Or how can we attract more young people, right? How can we attract more young people? What do we need to do to get young people to know about us, come to us, and be with us? That's a great question. And how might we begin to answer that question? Well, we begin, oddly enough, with secondary research. I know it sounds weird. You begin with but secondary research is Google, right? Secondary research is newspapers, is the census department, is anywhere where somebody else has done the research, right? Hence it's secondary to you. It's primary to them, secondary to you. But that's where you begin. Think of it as a funnel. If I had slides, I could have shown you. It's like a funnel. So you begin with your question at the top, and then you're like, okay, let's begin to get some research. So what are some of the questions we might ask about young people around us? Are there young people around us? What are they like? What do they like? You know, those are two different questions. So what age are we talking about? Where are they currently spending their time? What sorts of things are they doing? What are they into? What are young people into these days, right? Those questions are the ones that are going to begin to give us insights. And what's an insight? Anytime you say, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Like if you were to find out that, for reasons unclear to us right now, that young people seem to be spending 2 hours a week participating in something at the local library, you'd be like, well, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I wonder what that is or why they're going there, right? Anytime you go, aha, that's interesting, that's an insight. And you want to get insights going into your funnel. You want to get as many of these insights as you can. So you have Google, but you also have specific places that research these sorts of things. So there's places like Pew, right? Pew studies religion. Barna studies religion, mostly from an evangelical sort of spin point, but they study it. Gallup. And the key is you want to find information that's 10 years or less old. Information that's 10 years or more could be considerably out of date, and that's how you end up also still wanting to build a skate park. So 10 years old, you know, these are simple information. 10 years old, no more. The sooner, right, the less time that's gone by, the better, because it'll be more relevant and more accurate. If, by the way, you don't know about like Pew and Gallup and Barna, you can also just Google, who studies the church? Google's amazing. I think they're also evil, but they're amazing in some ways. So what you want to do then is, once you have your design question and you've done some secondary research where you have some insights, where you have some of those like, this is when you may want to, I guess, if you're a man, grow a beard. If you're a woman, just, I don't know, get your glasses and take them off and go like, because you want to be inquisitive and ask, what does that mean? So once you do this, you want to observe whether or not what you're finding out on the national scale is actually accurate also of your neighborhood. So if you're finding out that kids are doing this library thing, and I'm totally making that up, I have no idea whether or not they are, but imagine that you do find this out. You want to find out, are they doing it here in my community? Is this what young people do? So go and observe. Go and be present there. Go and find out what other things they're doing at the library. Go and observe young people in your own community. Where are they hanging out? What sorts of things are they doing? You're kind of like an investigator. Remember, you're being curious about all of this. And as you do that, you're also going to gain more insights. You're going to be like, well, that's interesting. They weren't going to the library, but for unknown reasons to me, they're going to the Rotary Club, right? And that would just be, now you know I'm making stuff up. So, and then you could be like, well, why are they doing that? And you can go and try to find out, like, what's going on? Do you guys do programming for young people? Just find out by observing whether the national trends are also true of your community. The final step in generating your insights is to have some conversations with young people. Actually have conversations where you sit them down and you ask them, hey, what's your life like? Tell me about your day. What's an average day for you? You'll find out that they're very busy, ostensibly. They somehow consider gaming part of their busy day, but yeah, you'll find out that they're very busy, and that's a reality to them, right? That they have school, that they have all these other things. So once you have conversations with them, you can also say like, hey, I'm just curious, if there was a service, like if, let's say that you discover in your conversation with them that they're not anti-church, and by the way, they're not. The majority of young people are not anti-church. They just have been turned off by church. There's a difference in the two. So as you're doing this, and as you're just talking to people, you might ask them like, what would a service look like for you? If someone were to do something, what would it look like? Well, they might say like, well, it has to be darker, and it has to be candles, and you have to have spin bicycles. No, just kidding. You're like, oh, spin church is back. So right here, let's put them in the cathedral. You're going to find in these conversations some more insights, and that's great. And the more conversations you have, the better. This is also a good time to point out, you should have a team helping you with this. Don't do this all on your own. Because if you have a team between 3 and 5 people, there are some wonderful things that happen. A, you can spread the work amongst different people. But here's the better part. You will each find different things interesting. One aha to you is not an aha to you. So when you're like, hey, I found this aha, and the other person's like, why is that an aha? I don't see that as an insight. Then you get to be like, oh no, this is why. And then they share their experience, what they found, and you'll actually collect more. The diversity of voices will actually be very helpful as you're doing this work. I was in Charlotte, North Carolina. I go to 11:30, right? Okay, just make sure. All of a sudden I'm like, don't tell me I have 13 minutes left. That's ridiculous. No, I was in Charlotte, North Carolina because the rector called me in. He said, Lorenzo, we have a youth group. It's incredible. These young adults are doing great things, but the moment that they have confirmation, patwee, they leave. And they want nothing to do with us. So we need to figure out something. And I said, okay. And I went there, and I did some focus groups with some of the young ones. And I just asked them questions like, hey, what's your life like? What's going on? Why do you think people don't come back after they do confirmation? All these things, we did that. Then I took a day off to sort of look at the research and compare it to the national research. And then the following day, I got together with them to present them the insights. But more importantly, it was an opportunity to just tell them, and this was, I sort of had to get the rector to say that he was on board with this. I said, hey, would you be okay if we did this? He said, fine, let's do it. Let's see what comes out. I said, young people, I didn't quite say it like that because it's the first way to turn them off is by calling them young people. I said, wonderful children of God. I didn't say that either. I said, hey, what's up? Here's our goal. Our goal is to turn you into disciples of Jesus Christ. And here's what it means to us that you be a disciple, because, by the way, I found that in the focus groups, the definition of what a disciple was vastly different between what the church thought and what the young people thought. This is what it means to us. Now, we're going to take the rest of the day, and we want you to tell us how we can help you become disciples. We want you to tell us what your youth group should be like. We want you to be the ones who do this. And he actually wrote a comment afterwards to my boss. He says, I have never in all my years of ministry seen my youth group go from being receivers to being leaders in the span of 2 hours. And all I did was sit them down and ask them. That's the power in this. So, is there a magical formula to bring young people into your church? No, there is not. We have really smart people in our church. We would have figured it out by now. If there was a smoking gun, if there was like that silver bullet, we all would have it now. We would have spread out the good news. But there is a way that you can discover what is the silver bullet for your community. And that is have conversations with them. So you'll have the insights, right? Remember the funnel? You'll begin with finding out your design question. We want to bring young people. How do we do it? Then you'll go and do national research. Then you'll do some observation just to compare it and find out what's going on in your neighborhood. Then you'll have some conversations. By the way, it's not hard to have conversations with young people. I know this sounds weird, but I've done it. Just I have a little table-like stand. It says, I'm a priest, do you want to talk? And I sit at Starbucks. Or I sit near the high school if I'm talking to young people who are younger, right? And I'm in my collar, and they will gladly talk to you, and I buy them a free cup of coffee. Sometimes when they're not coming to me, I go to them when they're about to buy. I said, hi, don't mean to be that creepy guy, but can I buy you the cup of coffee if you just spend 5 minutes with me? I'd like to ask you some questions about your spiritual life. And they believe you because you're in your collar, right? So sometimes also, believe it or not, if you have a clipboard, it is amazing the power of the clipboard. It's like, if you have a clipboard, people think you're really powerful. It's like, oh, he's got a clipboard. He's in power. He knows things. So you want to do this. You want to have those conversations because now you have a whole bunch of little insights. You have a whole bunch of things that kids have told you they like, that you have found out from the national research that matches in your local observations, right? You found connections. If this was like one of those police procedurals, we would be drawing those little red tape things from one to the other. It's like, aha! And it all boils down to one thing. That's sort of where we would be at. Now, this is a great time to get others involved. All right, let me pause that for a second. If you've ever had an idea and you bring it to your vestry, again, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, nobody's guilty here. But if you've ever had a vestry that said something like, oh, we tried that in 1972 and it didn't work, right? That would never happen here in Vermont, I am certain of it. That's an outlier in California that only happens like that. But the way that you sort of do away with that you can mitigate that, is get them involved early. So if you do have a team of 3 to 5, make sure one of you is okay with speaking, and just every once in a while, and during your announcement, say, hey, just a quick update, want to let you know, we got together and we decided with the vestry that they gave us this authority to go out and study this, and we're going to study it, and we want to find out, could we attract young people, and how's that going to happen? They're going to be like, oh, that's great, we need more young people, this is amazing. And then you come back like in a few weeks, and you're like, hey, guess what we found out? Young people don't like skate parks anymore. That and other things we found out. So if you want to partake, talk to us in coffee hour. They'll come and talk to you. They'll tell you, my grandson does this. They'll tell you all sorts of stories that have nothing to do with reality. But you'll hear them. What you're actually doing is you're getting them to buy in early. So that at the end, when you come with an idea that you actually want to try, they're not going to sit there and be like, we tried that in 1972 and it didn't work. They're going to be like, oh, we've seen this sort of move all along the way. Let's go and try it. We want to try that. That's how you do it. Will there be that one person? Yes. There's always that one person. So get others involved early on in this process. Now we're moving on to step number 2, which is the fun step. It's developing ideas. So remember, step number 1 was discovering insights, and your mindset was to be curious. Step number 2 is when you're actually coming up with these ideas, you're developing the ideas, and your mindset is to be playful, right? You've heard all the rules, right, of like brainstorming. Don't worry about the budget right now. Don't worry about all those things right now. Be playful. Imagine that you have all the resources in the world. You don't know what God has in store for you. You don't know where the Holy Spirit's going to show up with $1 million to make it happen. Whatever it is, just be playful at this point, right? You have these insights. So you always want to begin this part with prayer, because we talk about the Holy Spirit as being the co-creator with God and us. This is an opportunity for us to invite the Holy Spirit very tangibly to be with us in coming up with these ideas. The collect we just read this morning is beautiful. Even if you're like, I can't pray out loud or spontaneously, extemporaneously, just read that collect from this morning. It was wonderful. So have that, bring the Holy Spirit into this. And your what if question, like what if we attracted young people, it really becomes now an action question. How might we? Right? It's not even like, how do we attract young people? It's a very broad question. How might we attract young people to our congregation? That shifts the question into one of action. And that's what you want now. You want ways that you'll walk out of here and actually have things to do. So, I list here for you 4 different ways that you can come up with ideas. And take your time with these also, by the way. One of the ways you can do it is, it's called other people's shoes. And what you do is you sit there, and from all the research that you've gathered, you go through their life every day. Like, what's an average day for a 25-year-old? I'll talk a little bit more about 25-year-olds in a moment. What's an average day for a 25-year-old now? And you're like, well, they get up. They're out of college probably by this point, so they probably, like, they have breakfast. Maybe they go to the gym in the morning. Then they go to work. They're in their commute. And at each one of these steps, you can actually be thinking of different ideas. You might be like, well, when they get up in the morning, what if we created for them something that could be an alarm for their clock that wakes them up, but that wakes them up with a positive word from God? I don't know, that's just an idea I came up with, right? Or for those who are in their commute, the average U.S. commute is 24 minutes, unless if you live in Los Angeles. for 24 minutes, we have them, and we know they love podcasts. So what if we created a podcast that was aimed at the questions they have, that invites their questions? And we make it a weekly podcast. Why? Because the basics of marketing are know, like, and trust. And if they know us, they like us, and they trust us, then when something happens that they want to have a hard conversation about life, they might reach out to us. So it's not that you're going to do a podcast and your church is going to be full on Sunday, but you're going to do a podcast that's introducing it to people about the questions that they have and ask them for their questions. And maybe you set it up together with a texting option so people can text you questions. And maybe you respond to them via text, because we know that young people today much prefer texting than they do a conversation over the phone. Right? So that might be a way. As you're going through their whole day, then they go, they work all day, and then maybe they go out for lunch. Is there a way that we could join them at lunch? Is there something that we might create that could bring the Holy Spirit into their lunch idea? They are incredibly spiritual young people, by the way. We know this because for 2 years in a row now, the number of nuns, not nuns, but N-O-N-E-S, has been going down. And what that means is that they select, when they're given the choice, what is your religious preference? They say, none. I have no religious preference. That number has gone down for 2 years in a row, but the numbers of Christianity have not gone up. They are choosing other things. You want to know what they are? They're choosing paganism. They're choosing witchcraft. Why? Because they see them as being much more open to the experiences of the Spirit. They see them as being much more mystical. More mystical? We created mysticism. We're just not telling them, right? We're just not getting to them. They have so brushed us off with that broad brush that says, you want to know the top two complaints that young people say about the church. One, you're exclusionary. You tell me that I can't love my LGBTQ friends, so I don't like your God, because that's not how God would be. And we're like, ours either, yay! So second is you talk about the poor, you're hypocrites. You talk about the poor, and then you ask for money for your airplane. We're like, that's not us, those are televangelists. I fly in the back of American Airlines. Trust me, it's not that comfortable, right? Those are the things they tell us. And so what they did is they said all of Christianity, all of organized religion is just irrelevant to me. And so what if we created some things that actually made it a little bit more relevant for them? I'm going to pause here for a second because I want to tell you of an idea that we're trying. We have, how many of you are familiar with the Ignatian Examen at the end of the day, right? If you boil it down and take out, it's from St. Ignatius of Loyola. If you take out all the religious sort of talk around it, or what, it boils down to two questions that you can ask yourself every day. What brought me life today, and what took away life from me today? And if you ask yourself those questions over a period of time, you will actually arrive at things that are taking life away from you, that you're like, why do I keep doing this thing that I now know keeps taking life away from me? And St. Ignatius said, that's the Holy Spirit telling you, stop doing this thing, right? If you're spending so much time gaming or on Tinder, young people, right, and that's taking time away from you, and you feel it's taking life away from you, it's like, why am I still doing it? That's what it does. So we created a little coaster that on the front of it has both questions. What brought you life today? What took away life from you today? And on the back of it is a QR code. And the QR code, when they go to it, we actually bought the website xcatholic.com. Because that is the lowest hanging fruit that we as the Episcopal Church could find, by the way. The lowest hanging fruit is former Catholics. We speak the same languages. We dress the same. We do everything the same. Except we obviously have women, and we acknowledge and love our LGBTQ brothers. And when you go, we're just developing now. I'm going to let you into a little what we're going to do. When you get there, it's going to be a little cartoon of a guy with a cat. It says, I see you saw my QR code. Right? And it's going to have in there, like literally it's going to have an exploration of faith where they can just spend time. It's going to have 1 minute how-to videos on explaining each one of the 14 largest faiths. So we're going to do like a world religion primer that you can do in 14 minutes. Each one of them is going to be just a minute long. So you can just find out that, like, if I were selling it and I only had a minute, what would I tell you about Buddhism or Hinduism? If they find God through that, I am the happier for it, right? That is where God is speaking to them. Brilliant. But of course, in there, it's going to be the Episcopal Church. I ain't no dummy either, right? And then it's going to move them down a path that leads them to ask more questions. Because we want them to ask more questions. Another study that we're studying this fall is actually November 1st. We're studying 25-year-old males. And here's why. It turns out that 25-year-old males, women do this earlier, thank you all for being more mature, is that 25 is when the prefrontal cortex of the brain gets formed. And we now know and believe that this is when males make lifelong decisions about their faith. So we're going to give them, it's an app that's going to remind them each day, and we're going to pay them to participate in the study. For 6 weeks, they're going to be asked at the end of each day to record themselves what brought you life today, what took away life from you today. And we have AI technology that's going to actually transcribe what they say. It's going to tell us what mood they were in when they were recording it. Yes, AI is that advanced that it can do that. And it's going to try to find common themes amongst all the participants. But what we're actually testing is if a young 25-year-old male spend 6 weeks asking themselves that question on more days than not. I'm mature enough to know that they're not going to do it every day, right? But if they ask it more often than not, by the end of the 6 weeks, are they asking deeper questions about life? This is a theological reflection what we're asking them to do. So the more we ask young people to do theological reflection, the more they're going to want to find out, where do I fit? Where do I belong? And that's when we can say, ooh, here, right here. The Episcopal Church welcomes you, right? So other people's shoes is one way of doing this. You can do an e-storm. You probably all have heard of brainstorming. Well, with an e-storm, it's sort of similar, except you're sending an email to about 100 of your friends. And you're going to tell them your design question that now is, how might we attract young people? So you might list like, hey, we've discovered a couple of insights. Here's a couple of things that we discovered. And we're looking for ideas of how we might attract young people to our congregation. Based on these things, what would you come up with? And it's okay if you want to send me back a picture. And through an e-storm, you can send it to 100 people, right? You can send it to a whole bunch more people than you could actually talking to them. Do not feel bad. Only about 20 of them are going to respond. Doesn't mean that they hate you as a friend. It just means that they're busy. And some of them are like, oh, I need to really think about this, and I'll think about it later, and then they forget. Just ask them, take 2 minutes right now and respond. How would you do it? What you just got, though, are 20 or 30 ideas that may be new to your idea. So put all these ideas into a bucket. Just keep putting ideas into a bucket, right? We did the other people's shoes, where you spend a day in their life. You're doing the e-storm. Brainstorming, you'll note that in the notes I put T+5. We all sort of know how to do brainstorming sessions. The best number, by the way, of people to do a brainstorming session is 7, as it turns out. So if you have more than 7 people, maybe you break it up. But 7 people is a great number for brainstorming sessions. Like right now, if we did a brainstorming session amongst all of us, it would be really difficult. And there would be many of you who would not say anything because there's so many others who would be speaking. But T+5, what that means is that, let's say you're going to set aside 15 minutes to do brainstorming amongst the 7 people that you brought together. What you want to do is T equals time, so time plus 5, and that's the total number of ideas that you should come up with. So if you're setting aside 15 minutes, the total number of ideas is 20. If you set aside half an hour, the total number of ideas is 35. And the reason, there's a very scientifically proven, Stanford proved this actually, the best ideas, the wildest ideas are going to be the +5. Because usually at about 15, you can come up, about 7 people, you can easily come up with 15 good ideas. But when time is, because the first ones are going to be it's like a curve, right? It's the bell curve. You're going to come up with like some really crazy idea, like Lorenzo had an idea. At the seminary, Virginia Seminary, where I worked, we did a brainstorming session for our 200th anniversary, and they said, we need to come up with some really cool ways of doing the 200th anniversary. And I was like, me first. And I was like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get a capsule, and inside the capsule, we're going to put one of the curriculum. And we're going to put the curriculum for an entire, like, if you have been there for 3 years of seminary, and we're going to put a diploma in there, and we're going to put a Bible, and we're going to send it up to space. And someday an alien will find it, and that'll be the first graduate of an alien from space. Thank you very much. Woohoo! Mic down. That's the outlier on the front part of the bell curve, in case you're wondering. Because then comes the reality that comes in. That's why I'm telling you, all ideas are good right now. There are no bad ideas. I don't know Elon Musk to get something into space, so it was a long shot idea. But then most of the ideas are going to be the same, right? In the bell curve, if we did ideas here, we would probably come up with the really strong bell curve. It's this part over here. It's these last 5 ideas that are going to stretch you, but among them is going to be one idea, I bet you, that you're going to say, ooh, it just gave me goosebumps. If we did that, that would be amazing. I would go to that church. Hopefully you're already going to that church because you're in that church. But yes, those are the ideas that we're looking for, and that's where time plus 5 can get you to that. And then, of course, now you have this bucket that's full of ideas. You're like, well, what do we do now? What you want to do, and that's what I put here at the end, is you want to cluster, discard, and vote. When you start clustering them by themes, right? Some ideas, and you can begin with really wide clusters, like, all right, which ones are inside the church, which ones are outside the church and the community. That's one way of doing it, and then you can cluster amongst them by themes, like which ones utilize music, which ones are about food, which ones are about this, and then some of them can be combined together into ideas. So you'll start to whittle them down little by little. Eventually, let's say that you ended up with the whole process and you had 50 ideas. God bless you, that's really a good number of ideas. And now you begin voting. Get the group of 7, make this another great opportunity to get the congregation involved, putting them up like if they were posters, and have little people just vote with little dots on them, on the ideas, and you'll start to see sort of where the Holy Spirit might be leading you towards an idea or two that are really, really good. Then what you want to do is move on to step number 3. So the best number, by the way, is 2 to 3 ideas. 2 to 3 ideas is what you want to end up with once you're done with that process. So you have these 2 or 3 great ideas for bringing young people into your congregation. Hopefully one of them is the one that gives you like goosebumps and you're like, oh man, if we did this, it would be so amazing. Let's do it. Let's totally do it. Now what you want to do is change your mindset. Remember, for the first step, which was to discover the insights, your mindset was to be curious. For the second step, was when you're actually coming up with the ideas, was to be playful. For this, the third step, your mindset is be bold. Because you've got to be able to take that leap of faith, as it were, to walk out there and to try these ideas. To help you do that, actually, if you look on the very next page, I created this little thing. I did not create it. I adapted this thing. Anybody ever heard of lean canvas in the business world? No. Okay, one person. Yay. 2 people, 3 people. Yay, I'm not alone. So I took it and I changed it to be called Mission Canvas. All this is basically a 1-page business plan, if you will. So a 1-page mission plan that in some ways forces you to look at 9 different areas, because you want to make sure that you've thought about your idea from different angles. That you've thought about the financing, that you've thought about can you have partners, So let me go through it real quick, and if you have it, this is what it looks like. By the way, it should take about 15 minutes to fill out. Unlike a mission business plan, right? If you were to do a business plan, it's going to be like 80 pages. The moment you pull the last page off the printer, it's already out of date. The moment that it hits reality, it's not going to be up to date anymore. It's going to be totally different. This is 15 minutes. 15 minutes of your time. And this is how it goes. So the first one, you've already got it. It's the design question, right? How might we attract young people to our congregation? Number 2, our solution. Let's say that our solution was that let's say we were going to do a podcast for Commute that answers your questions, right? Let's just say that's our solution. Perfect. Number 3, you go back. Who are the stakeholders? In other words, who are the people that can say no? This is more important. For example, if you decided to do like a contemporary service, who would be a stakeholder there? The Altar Guild. We always forget the Altar Guild, and they're like the most powerful. They're like the mafia of the Episcopal Church. I never go against the Altar Guild. Never. Anyways, Altar Guild rules, best ever. So you would put like Altar Guild because they can kill me and my cat, right? So that's number 3. Number 4, what's your elevator pitch? In other words, how can you succinctly say your idea in a way that makes sense to someone? An elevator pitch is basically if you had a business idea and you were in an elevator that's not, the building's not too tall, and you had to go down the elevator with that person, could you quickly and succinctly tell them your idea during that. That's why it's called an elevator pitch. So what would be the elevator pitch for, let's say, the podcast? Well, we're going to create a podcast aimed at young people that they can listen to in their commute that answers their questions about faith. Notice that I didn't say it's about Christian formation. I'm not trying to form them in their car. I'm just answering their real questions about faith. And we're going to tie it in together with a texting option so they can chat with someone via text about faith. Brilliant. Simple and to the point. That's number 4. Number 5, what is the path to our targets? Do we know how to get to the young people? Like, are we doing all this work? Do we know how to get to them? You might say, well, we're going to do TikToks, or we're going to do Instagram, or we're going to, whatever it might be. But maybe you already have some young people in your congregation that you can tap that can help you do this, right? But you got to figure out how are you going to get to the people, because you can build the best skate park in the world, but if you don't advertise it and they're not going to use it, it doesn't matter. So what is the path to the targets that you're going to get? Number 6 that we're looking at is, who are the partners, the possible partners in this with us? Like if you have a podcast, maybe you know someone at the local radio station, or maybe someone in your congregation already does a podcast. It seems like everyone and their mother does. So maybe you can use their studio so you don't even have to like spend money, right? Or somebody maybe already has the texting technology, or if not, who might be a good person to help us fund the little texting technology, right? Those sorts of things, those are partners that you can use. Then you get, while all the others, the order of 1 through 9 is not as important, 7 and 8 are. 7 and 8, I recommend to you, do go in order. Because you will look first at the funding sources, and you'll sit there and say, okay, where can we get some money to make this happen? Okay, I think I can put in like a couple $100. I think the congregation has like $50. And I think the diocese maybe has some money available. Maybe we can get like $500 from them. All right, we can come up with $750. Great. Then you look at what are the expenses. You're like, okay, you'll begin by looking at the question saying, how do we make this work for $750? If you do it the other way, if you begin with, what are the expenses? Well, to do this podcast, we're going to have to build a studio, and we're going to have to get the best microphones. So that's easily $9,000, right? Let's say it comes out to $9,000. You're like, oh, our funding sources are, we have $750. Well, that's it, idea out. I have seen ideas killed because they think they can't make them work because of the finances. When you do it the other way, trust me, it is a mental trick that works. It's one of those mental hacks. When you begin by saying, how much money do we have? Then you begin by saying, how do we make this work for $750? Not the other way around, right? Then you look at that. And then finally, number 9 is, what are the key metrics? How will we measure this? How will we know if what we're doing is working? Like, you might say with a podcast, it could be the number of downloads. Be generous. Keep in mind that the average podcast gets downloaded 136 times within the span of the first 30 days after being released. 136 times. So don't be putting out a podcast out there thinking you're going to be the next Joe Rogan who's going to get millions of downloads, right? Be realistic. Think, okay, if we get 20 people, because think about it. If you had 20 young people here asking you their faith questions, you would say, that was an amazing evening, right? You would say, we had 20 young people who listened to me answer their questions about faith. Brilliant. But somehow when it's a podcast and we can't see it, or we count views, we're like, well, no, that doesn't count. Because, it was only 20 people. It's like, yeah, because you're comparing it to like American Idol. But let's be a little bit realistic on this. But what are the key metrics that you would look at in order to figure out, is this working for us? Does this make sense for us? One of those metrics, by the way, make sure that you put as one of those metrics, how much time did we spend doing this? Because afterwards you might be like, oh my God, whew, that was a lot more work than we thought to put out this little podcast. Do we still want to keep doing that? And that's what brings you to the trying cycle. Oh, wait, so that's the mission canvas. Let me tell you about the minimum viable prototype. Remember when I told you about Spin Church earlier, right? My brilliant idea, I still think one day, right? The way that the church normally would approach something like this would be like, well, we have the real estate, so we might as well just go ahead and get the bicycles, right? So we're just going to go ahead and get 10 spinning bicycles, and we'll put them downstairs and see if anybody comes, and then we'll advertise it, and then we're going to hire someone to do this, and all of a sudden, you're at $20,000. We made that whole experiment, and we were there a total of 8 times. We did it for 2 months. And it cost us under $3,000. And that includes all the advertising, the rental of the space, the insurance. Of course, we needed insurance. Everything all in was that. But we didn't go out and rent a space. We didn't go out. If you're going to do a podcast, figure out if you can borrow someone's microphone and record it that way first, right? Actually, there are some $16 microphones that if you put into your phone, if you have an iPhone, it is an amazing recording device. Really, really, really good, actually. So if you have just a simple microphone with a little wind cover, you can actually record a simple podcast really well and then edit it on free software like Audacity. So you can actually save a lot of money by doing it that way. What you want to do is you want to figure out what is the minimum viable prototype? What is the thing that we can test to see if there's a there before we go and invest a lot of money? How do we test this? And so you strip away more things. All right, what we're trying to try out with the podcast is not even so much will people download it. What you're actually trying to figure out, if you think about it with the podcast, is will young people's spirituality be piqued by it? That's what you're actually trying to find out. You're not just trying to put out a podcast into the world to have 20 people listen to it a week for no reason. You want people to be, right? That's the job of the church, is to transform people's lives through Jesus Christ, through the witness of Jesus Christ. So you might actually put together a podcast, a sample podcast, and find a couple of people that will do you the honor of listening to a 15-minute podcast about, answering their questions on faith. Maybe even the same people that you went to get those questions on faith. And just say, would you listen to it? Would you tell me what you think? Another way of doing it is you can actually run a couple of ads on Facebook or on, not so much on Facebook, but on Instagram for the right age of people, 25-year-olds that you're trying to reach. Bless you. And when you do that, you can run some ads, say, I'll give you a $10 Starbucks card if you just listen to this podcast and tell me what you think, or answer this little survey about it. Right? That's a minimum viable prototype because we haven't committed to producing a podcast once a week or once a day for 3 years. We haven't done none of that. We haven't bought equipment, right? We spent $16 on a microphone. I did it by myself. I got questions from young people, and I put it together, and then I spent $100 on advertising it, and I got feedback from 5 people, by the way, is the best number of feedback to get. It's in my book. There's actually, is that my timer? No. If you look on the book, actually, in the back of the book, by the time that you're talking to the 5th person and getting feedback on a new thing, you will have found about 80% of the things that you're going to find out. You'll find out the majority of things that you need to find out. You don't need to talk to 300 people. Guess what happens? Your bell curve is going to happen again, right? Most of the people are going to tell you the exact same things about the podcast. They're going to tell you, well, I really liked it, or I think the questions need to be more provocative, or I didn't like the answer. By the way, one of the things that young people really, really like is when we say, I don't know the answer to that question, but let's explore it together. Because then they know you're authentic. Then they know that you're not just trying to come up with every answer to every question. So you have your minimum viable prototype, and you go out and you try it. You literally just go out and try it. You have people listen to it, you get feedback from them, then you can evaluate. The trying cycle goes, you try it, you evaluate, and you either iterate or stop it. You try it, you evaluate, you iterate or stop it. Try it, evaluate, iterate or stop it. Try it, evaluate. And every time you're making changes, that's what you're doing, is you're iterating. You're just making more changes to see it as something new, right? So you just do that. You just keep doing that until you decide there's a there, or remember, you're going to fail at this. There's not a there. Or that just took way too much effort for us to do. It was a great idea, but it just takes too much effort or too much money. And it's in the evaluation that you can determine whether things work or not. So those are the 3 steps and the 3 mindsets that you want to have as you're doing this work. When you're doing this work, remember, let me tell you something right now. There will be that in-between space. You're like, ooh, what's that? The in-between space is when you first come up with the idea and when you actually implement the idea. There's that in-between when roadblocks will come in, when people will tell you, you're crazy, that's just not going to work, where all these other things are going to happen. This is how I think about it. You probably do this all the time out here, it's so beautiful. You go on a road trip, right? This is going to be amazing. And you know, maybe if in California you're able to like put down the top on your car and the hair, you know, you have the wind going through your hair. You have Tom Petty on the car. I can say this in this audience and you all know who Tom Petty is. I'm saying that to young people. They're like, what are you talking about? So you have Tom Petty on the car. You're like riding down the highway. You know, you're just amazing. This is it. And then you get stuck in traffic. It's like, oh, okay, traffic, a little bit of traffic. Then the clouds come in. It's like, oh, let me put the top back on. Then you're like, oh my God, I'm not even closer to where I left or to where I'm going. This is forever. And you just got to keep going. You just got to keep going. That's the in-between time. This time when you don't know, a lot of ideas die in the in-between time because the energy that when you first started it has died down. We're human. That's inevitable. That's what happens with us, right? So this is why it's also important to have a team. This is why we go to church on Sunday. When my faith is not enough, yours can hold me up. When your faith is not enough, I can be there for you to hold you up. This is the same with our team. When the idea seems like, oh, it's just not going to work or everyone seems against us, if it's still a good idea and the Spirit is calling you to it, let us hold each other up and do this thing. Let us make it work. On October 24th, TriTank, the experimental laboratory that I run, is releasing a movie. And this movie will showcase 3 possible scenarios of the future in 10 years. One of the things I didn't tell you about my training, I also have not only do I have an MDiv, I also have an MBA, bless you, and I'm also a trained futurist from the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto, California. That is a real place, by the way. The Institute for the Future is not just something you would see in a sci-fi movie. You're like, oh, Institute for the Future, my butt. No, there is a place, and they're really, really good. Companies pay a lot of money to get their foresight about the future. And my bosses and I thought that it would be a good idea if we trained me to do that so that we can not always be trying to catch up as a church, but actually look ahead a little bit and be like, can we be a little bit ahead of the curve? So this October 24th is a Monday, we're going to be releasing this movie. And I'm saying that to you now with these 3 scenarios for 2 reasons. One is if you're here tomorrow when I'm preaching, I'll actually share with you one of those scenarios. I'm not going to do that now, but tomorrow I will. But most importantly, the reason why I'm sharing that with you is to let you know that TriTank, because TriTank is a staff of 1. Well, me and my llama. For any of you that follow me on Facebook, you know that I travel with a stuffed llama. He's already had his pictures taken here, so he's in the back right now. I travel with a little stuffed llama, and that's the staff, right? But I still want to be a resource to you. Not only as myself, but as the resources that TriTank has. So here's what I'm offering. For any of you that participated, and you know that we did something with you all recently where we did the how to build partnerships in your community, and then we did a coaching conversation with the presenters of that. If any of you want to continue on that, we have hired a coach, we've contracted with a coach that will help you along with that process. Secondary to that, if any of your congregations want to try any of this, I will make that coach available to you as well as a group conversation where you can learn from each other in peer learning, but you can also have a coach who will hold you accountable and be there for you. Second, beyond that offer, I want to offer myself. So write this down, all of you that have a pen. Lorenzo@tritank.org. That is my email, Lorenzo@tritank, TRYTANK.org. I set aside a certain number of hours per week to talk to people. So if you have an idea that you're like, this might be the best thing ever, or I may just be killing the church, call me. We'll set up a time, we'll chat, and we'll go through your idea. If you want a conversation partner as you're doing this wild and crazy work of trying in the church, I want you to think of me, think of TriTank as a resource. You also, of course, have some amazing resources here in your own diocese. Bishop Shannon and Walter are amazing in conversations. Susan can, by the way, if you do want to take part of any of the coaching, you reach out to Susan, and she will make that happen with us. She will help us in all of that. She's in the back waving hello to everyone. So your wonderful canon can help us make that happen. So all that to say, because I know that in-between time is real, know that you're in my prayers as you're trying new things, as you're becoming a new thing in the world, as you're singing, if you will, a new church into being. Know that you're in my prayers, but beyond just my prayers, think of me as a resource. Reach out, know that I'm there to help you, know that you will continue in my prayers, and that with God's grace, this church, our future can be certainly bigger than our past. Thank you very much.